Hey, it's Ben Wise from ZOAR Fitness, and today we're going to be going over our ramp up intervals on the assault bike. So this is a really tough but great workout. I'll do this probably at least every couple cycles, and I'll hit it for a progression of maybe 3 or 4 weeks. So first I'm going to explain the what of the workout, so the workout specifics, kind of the logistics of it, and any modifications that you might do. So the workout that you're going to see me demoing that I did this morning, it was 3 sets. You're only going to see 2 of the actual intervals, but it's going to be 3 total sets. And it's going to start at 100 watts on the assault bike, and it's going to climb by 50 watts every 30 seconds until I fail. So it's a really challenging workout, especially as you get into the later parts and the later every 30-second interval and then 30 seconds of that ladder, it gets especially challenging. So this could easily be modified to really customize a bunch of different target audiences depending on who you are. Whether you're just someone who's trying to improve your own performance, like you are the athlete and you're programming for yourself or you're self-coached. If you are someone who does group classes like CrossFit classes or group design classes, you can certainly modify this to a number of different people. So it's every set number, maybe it's every 10 minutes or something like that, or it's chunked up differently. So depending on how powerful a person is and how good of shape they are, what their fitness level is, you can certainly modify it so everyone gets done at about the same time so that it works logistically in a class setting. Or you could do it as an individual design coach if you're a remote coach and you're giving this to your athlete, where you can tailor it, progress it in different ways week to week, and give that athlete the same kind of look, but vary it over time. So really there's 4 different ways that I think would be appropriate to modify this workout depending on who you are and what type of athlete you are. So the first way is how much the wattage is climbing by. So for me, it's climbing by 50 watts every interval. That could be varying. For example, say we have a class setting and we're gonna have this class climb every 30 seconds. We could have, depending on someone's 10-minute test calorie score, climbing by different amounts of wattage every set amount of time. So say we have someone and they're at less than 120 calories on that 10-minute test, we could have them climbing by maybe 30 watts. If we have someone between 120 and 150 calories on that test, we could have them climb by 40. We could have somebody between like 150 and 180 climbing by 50, and that's where you'll see I was today. And then you'll see above 180, a really powerful person is probably going to be able to climb by 60 watts each interval. Another way you can do that is how often the wattage jumps. So this is really, if you're thinking about the outcome of this, the faster you jump the wattage, so let's say it's every 15 seconds or every 20 seconds, so it climbs much quicker, you're going to fail sooner as well. But you'll likely fail at a higher wattage. So say I climbed every 15 seconds instead of every 30 seconds, you would see that I would probably get through not twice as many, but likely I would get maybe another 20% higher in terms of wattage or something like that. Where again, if you're depending what dose response you want from that athlete at that time, that's what's really gonna dictate that. So the third way you could do this is the number of sets that you're performing. So I did 3 in this video, but you could do easily 4 or 5, depending again on what type of athlete this is or if it's a class setting. And part of that is if you're going much above, whether you 5, 6, 7, up to like 10 sets, you're gonna wanna set a cap to that in terms of the effort of each individual set. So maybe if I went up to an RPE 8 out of 10, like an 80%, then I would stop once I get to that kind of perceived exertion level. Or I could do something where at maybe 500 watts, you just set a hard cap where at that point they just stop, they rest and recover. Obviously you have to know the athlete fairly well. You could do something like 125% of their 10-minute test wattage is when they're gonna cap that particular workout. And that's a way where you could build in more sets and get more work spread out over a long period of time. So you'll see here, it's really starting to get painful for me. Transitioning into tri-directional power output, which is something we'll get into in a different video. It's sort of a compensation pattern, but there's nothing wrong with it, and it's going to happen, especially as you get really close to failing. And now that I've actually failed, the last thing I want to talk about is rest time, because this is appropriate now, because I'm actually resting and doing my best to recover. You'll see that I kind of hyperventilate the first maybe 30 seconds up to 2 minutes that I get off the bike, depending on who that person is and what their limiters are. But the last thing that you can really adjust is that rest time. So this rest time for me is going to be 4 minutes before I go back and repeat the next set. So it's very close to a 1-to-1 work to rest. So that's a pretty good rule of thumb for a duration of about 4 minutes, I guess, if we're wanting to repeat it over maybe 4 or 5 sets, this would certainly be kind of an appropriate dosage. Whereas if we see someone and they're dropping off in sets 2, 3, and 4, where maybe if I got 4.5 minutes into that first one, and then the next one maybe I get 3.5, and the next one I get at 2 minutes, 15 seconds and drop off, I probably didn't program something correctly, where I really want to make sure that this is getting hit at a kind of set interval and that I'm getting to about the same place in that workout. Probably not exactly the same place, but at least getting close and making sure that we're building up to that each time, and that it's at least somewhat sustainable. So people get tempted if it's a really short interval to make the rest time really short, but that just means that you can go way harder in that shorter interval and that you're probably gonna need fairly close to the same amount of rest. So don't necessarily get tempted just because you make the intervals much shorter or you didn't make it as far to take less rest. So make sure you're taking the time that you need so you can build that into this. So you'll see I get into my second interval here, and you'll see that, again, this is really easy at the beginning of this interval, which potentially, depending how long you stretch out each of these ladders of the jumps or the ramp ups, you could actually have some of the recovery built into the beginning part of that next set or interval. So for me, the first minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes potentially can all be part of my recovery process and part of a flush or just clearing fatigue, getting rid of those byproducts, get everything moving and flushing out again. So again, depending how you program it, you could almost build it in where you need very little rest if you start off at a very low wattage on the bike and build very slowly. So in the second interval, I really want to get into the why. Like, why would you program desaturation intervals or ramp up intervals on the assault bike? Like, what is the utility of it? So the first thing that we have to realize is that there's always this tug of war or balance that's going on if we're talking about energy systems training, where there's the supply of oxygen and the demand or use or consumption of oxygen. And in ramp up intervals, we slowly are transitioning from it being a supply issue where you're gonna have all the oxygen in the muscle that you need and in the bloodstream that you need. And then eventually, once your workload gets to a certain point, it's going to, the actual use of that or consumption of that oxygen is gonna get to a point that's much higher, so your muscle is gonna begin depleting of oxygen. So that's kind of the whole point of this. So there's really 3 different reasons why I would program ramp up intervals for different types of athletes. Number one, it just prevents, let's just call it gaming, where someone starts off at a higher output where they kind of build up on the bike really quickly, almost like a short little sprint, and then they'll taper their wattage over a longer period of time, which is going to, again, allow for the best score if we were just talking about flat wattage for time. So if you're doing maybe 100 calories for time, you'd start off at a little bit of a higher wattage, and then you'd slowly bleed that over the course of that time. And that's what I mean by gaming, and this is really something that just prevents gaming. If we're talking about energy systems training, the goal is to train the energy system. It's not to just try to get the best score. So this is the difference between optimizing and adapting, the difference between training and testing. So this is really something that we need to nail down and to figure out, are we trying to get better at the sport initially, or are we trying to get our energy systems and ceiling better so that we can transition into sport-specific modalities later on? It's just something to think about for yourself. The other thing, besides preventing gaming, this prevents really powerful athletes from, again, let's just call it tanking, where they get like this huge burning sensation in their legs, and they just like get really acidic, and they, are really able to drive all this tension and power early on, and then they'll tank. So what this prevents from happening is muscle or really blood flow occlusion. So occlusion meaning stopping. So potentially blood flow is not exiting the muscle, and if they really create enough tension, it might not enter either. So if blood flow isn't exiting or potentially entering, that prevents any additional oxygen from coming in or any waste from being removed. So this is where people feel really acidic, the muscle desaturates of oxygen, and again, performance is just gonna drop as soon as that happens. So with ramping up really slowly on the bike, or at least progressively, what that allows for is these powerful athletes to stimulate their heart and to get it to produce as much output and as much cardiac output as needed to meet the demands of the output on the bike. And by progressing that slowly, it prevents them from creating so much muscular tension immediately that it blocks off blood flow to the muscle. The last thing, the third reason that I program this is for maximizing that cardiac output, like I just mentioned. So there's this idea of cardiac lag, whereas if you thought about creating as much tension on the bike or starting a bike sprint as quickly as you could, your muscle's gonna get the tension really quickly, like less than a second, your muscle's gonna be at peak tension. However, if we think about what happens to your heart as it's trying to catch up with that muscle, it's going to jump up slowly, and oftentimes we'll actually peak on a sprint in our terms of our heart rate after our max power output is already gone down. So there's this big peak and the heart actually lags behind and the heart rate and output lags behind. So by slowly increasing our workload over a period of time over this interval, we're really stimulating the heart to create as much power output as possible. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let us know, and head over to ZOARfitness.com for training resources and one-on-one coaching for the sport of fitness.